My inheritance has cost me. The car and gadgets are nice. And I've almost gotten used to the smell in the cave. It's the criminals. Since my father died, they've focused their attention on me.
Hey man, somebody killed this lady.
And the people around me. My father's enemies have gotten more twisted with age, more violent and suicidal.
Crashing this flight with no survivors.
Because they know their inevitable end is near. They've seen Batman die. They've seen each other die.
I can't believe they killed him. Yeah, man, things are getting really bad out here.
The Riddler.
This puzzle is far more than any mere game.
Dr. Death.
You and I go way back, Batman.
Two-Face.
I still believe in Harvey Dent.
All gone. Like the life I hoped for beyond this mask. Everything I have, everything I am, is because of him. I'm the Batman's daughter. I am the Huntress. And tonight, I'm hunting the man who destroyed my life.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Huntress Podcast, number 54. This is the Right On Network. I'm Ashford, and along with me is Laurel. Hello, Laurel.
Hello, Ashford.
And we also have Diane. Hello, Diane.
Hello, Ashford.
All right, so this is episode 54, the Huntress Podcast. We're talking about Helena Wayne's Huntress. This is Adventure Comics number 466. Laurel, do you have the other stats for this one?
Yep. It was cover dated December 1979. Writer is Paul Levitz. Artist Joe Staton. Adrian Roy is the colorist. Ben Oda letterer. Ross Andrew editor. And its story is entitled The Defeat of the Justice Society.
Now, Diane, we were talking about some things before we hit record as far as Helena Wayne's Huntress being out there currently. Can you speak on that, please?
We're talking about the Infinite Frontier era.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah. So, spoiler alert to anyone who has not read Stargirl, Spring Break Special. So, the spring break special is basically it's basically a prologue of things to come for both Courtney Whitmore, Stargirl, and especially the Justice Society. So a few things got explained in these teasers, such as how, Green Arrow and Speedy, are the same Green Arrow and Speedy that were in the
Seven Soldiers of Victory.
Yes, the Seven Soldiers of Victory. So they do explain, how they're the same people that are currently appearing in the comics right now. And they also have a teaser at the end of the Stargirl special that shows Pedegaton recruiting Clock King to assist him in hurting a lot of Justice Society heroes. And so when you turn the page, there is a spread of 3 generations of JSA heroes. That's the original team that operated in the 1940s. There's the first legacy team that operated between the 1970s and 1980s. And then there's the modern Justice Society team. And featured in the second generation team, or the first legacy team, is Helena Wayne, the original Huntress, confirming that she does exist in the Prime Earth timeline, but that her disappearance now is linked to Pedegaton, or at least that's what's being hinted at in the Stargirl special. So this looks like it might be setting up that storyline that Jeff Johns initially teased in Doomsday Clock number 12, where Helena Wayne, the original Huntress, does exist, but she's time displaced. So it looks like he intends to follow up on that story if he ends up writing the new Justice Society ongoing, possibly sometime later this year. So yeah, for everyone listening, if you're a Helena Wayne Huntress fan, you'll definitely want to be paying attention to Infinite Frontier, because she's also teased to appear in that story, in the first issue, I should say. And she's definitely hinted to make her comeback in the Justice Society title. So if you're a classic Helena Wayne Huntress fan and you've been waiting for the classic Huntress to return, it looks like that's now happening on Prime Earth, you know, with the Prime Earth Justice Society. So that's something to look out for, especially in the later half of the year, I think.
And I think if you like Stargirl a little bit, you should pick up that special. It's a fun read. And Helena Bertinelli is out there running around. I have in my hands right now Detective Comics 1036, and I loved it. And Diane, she made me aware that that wasn't her only appearance so far, so I'm going to have to check that out. But right now, I'm going to say that we are the definitive Huntress podcast. We're relevant. We've been relevant. Huntress is always out there running around, but I think this is awesome stuff. I'm excited. It's a good time for the Empire. Now, before we move on, I'm sorry, we got to talk about when this stuff came out. Did we talk about that, Laurel?
Yes, this one, 1979.
Okay. I'm too excited.
That's all right.
So,
we have any email?
Yeah, let's talk about that. So we did get some feedback when we talked about the Justice League of America 172. When it's those team ups, it was like a murder on the Orient Express. However, this was on, I guess, the Justice League
Satellite.
headquarters.
Yeah, they're satellite.
Yeah. So this is from Tim Price. It says, I have a bunch of sentimental attachments to this issue. I never owned it, but must have read a borrowed copy. I think this was my first Huntress story, and maybe of the JSA. So as usual for me back then, I was left wondering what happened next. And I guess we'll get there soon enough. As a whodunit, it's quite enjoyable. And I really appreciate Huntress's strong showing on the detective front. But even younger me was shaking my head at Flash/Spirit King escaping because super powerful magic bubble didn't block the device which the JSA used to enter the satellite in the first place. Oh well, it's comics. Till next time, Huntrio. Lord, what'd you think about that?
That was really nice. I can't imagine as a kid this would be a lot of fun. This must have been a joy to read. I'm glad he told us that.
Yeah. Diane, any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I definitely agree with Tim Price on the point about, you know, how could the Justice League and Just Society overlook, you know, the transporter device that, you know, the JSA traveled through to get to Earth 1 in the first place. So yeah, I think that's something that we did talk about in our discussion of that issue. But yeah, I definitely agree with Tim. I do shake my head at that. It's like, how do you overlook the most obvious thing? Because the thing is that, okay, so the JLA satellite might be blocked off, but Earth 2 is not. So he just ran loose by going back.
He ran through the back door.
Yeah. So yeah, fantastic feedback from Tim as always. Definitely, I always see eye to eye with everything that he says. So yeah, it's great. It's great to hear back from you, Tim. Keep that feedback coming.
We love it, and we want more of it. Now, here's some more feedback. This is from, on Twitter, DC Multiverse Historian says, there's a thought that the Roger Romaine in this issue, who orchestrated the death of Mr. Terrific, was the same Roger who battled Steel, aka Hank Haywood, as the Gadgeteer. Both were created by Jerry Conway. And I have asked him about this on Twitter. I'm hoping he responds.
Interesting.
Yeah. Diane, any thoughts about that one?
You know, it never occurred to me, but now I'm curious to know the answer to that too. So hopefully they do answer.
And we also have Grumpy Old Bruce on Twitter. Talks about the scene with Huntress and Batman. He says the scene is talking about Huntress Podcast is talking about right now stuck with me for a long time when I first read it. I was 9 or 10 years old, and I remember it being the first time I was really emotionally moved reading a comic. Remember that scene?
Is this where Batman and she are talking about her father's death?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that was touching.
I'm loving the whole aspect. This has happened on a couple of podcasts where people are given their backstory.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that. I love hearing like, oh, this is how I came to, this is my first Helena Wayne story I ever read, or I was 9 years old when I read this. And it just, I don't know, it gives it a time and a space.
Well, it makes me look at it a little bit differently too, because I try to put those lenses on so I can hopefully see it from the position they are. And that just makes the whole story just that much little bit different, and you can enjoy it that way as well. So it's fun to have that perspective.
I love when they tell us this stuff, because it's like in the old days where you go over to someone's house and you look through their CD case. Because it tells you stuff. Like, oh, okay, you like Fleetwood Mac. Or I would have never known that until I went to your CD booklet. Cool. So, yeah. Well, Diane, could you be ever so kind and give us the synopsis of Adventure Comics 466?
Yeah, absolutely. The Just Society have all gathered to attend Mr. Terrific's funeral following his death in the hands of the Spirit King during Earth 1 visit. All depart for memorial service except for Huntress and Power Girl, who stay behind to watch over the JSA headquarters. At one point, Power Girl asks Huntress why the JSA disbanded for 12 years. Huntress proceeds to tell her about the defeat of the Just Society in 1951. It all started when a mysterious foreign agent appeared at an organized crime meeting to offer a plan on getting rid of the Justice Society for them. The crime bosses accept the man's offer and pay him to build a satellite that can permanently contain the Justice Society. The mysterious agent fulfills his promise and lures the Justice Society into the satellite, where they are successfully captured by using their own weaknesses against them. The plan worked in theory, but the agent failed to realize that the JSA are a team and work together to resolve problems. Their combined efforts succeeded in securing their own release and return to Earth, where they successfully captured the mysterious agent and the crime bosses who hired him. Upon delivering them to the US government, as soon as they saw who they captured, the JSA received a subpoena to appear in a congressional hearing the next day. At the hearing, Senator O'Fallon demanded to know their connection to the foreign agent. The JSA denied any association with him, stating that he attempted to kill them. The senator then asks them to unmask, in the name of transparency, which the JSA declined to do. They then departed and decided to remain inactive until 12 years later. In the present, Power Girl is surprised to learn the JSA just gave up for 12 years and felt that this had to have been the work of a supervillain like the Psycho Pirate. But Huntress confirms this is not the case. Power Girl then says, "There are some things about your world I just don't understand." Huntress says she's not alone in those sentiments. And this concludes Adventure Comics 466.
The Justice League wouldn't help him, so Batman formed a new team. These people of power are all looking for something, be it their past, or a purpose, or simply somewhere to fit in. These are the heroes for a troubled age. They are the Outsiders.
We are the Outsiders.
Covering Mike W. Barr's 1983 series from the very beginning, as they face villains no other team can, like Agent Orange, the Force of July, and the Nuclear Family. Puns. This is The Outcasters, a Batman and the Outsiders podcast. Look for us with the Huntress Podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and Spotify. Or listen at our website, thehuntress.podcast.com, and follow us on Twitter at BatOutcasters. We are the Outcasters, because to live outside the law, you must be honest.
We are the Outsiders.
All right, let's take a look at this one. We got quite a little bit going on here. Very enjoyable as far as I'm concerned. Ashford, let's start off. First thoughts.
Fun read. I feel like I don't know if everyone agrees with me, but I feel like the state of DC right now, they're trying to go back to this feel.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of optimism. Even when sinister stuff was happening, I didn't have to read it with a cynicism. So just that innocence, but not stupid. Just a more innocent time. It was fun to read, and I love how we have Helena Wayne still front and center. She was one of the detectives on that satellite. She's here telling Power Girl about like the history of the JSA, whereas with Bruce and Tim, they were explaining to us like, hey, this is one of the first JSA stories. So you have Helena Wayne telling it to them. This was great.
You know what? When she says her father told her about this, that they were inactive while she was growing up, it makes me wonder, when did he tell her that he was Batman? Because she's got to be old enough to keep that to herself. It just clicked in my brain just when you were talking. I'm like, how did they pull that off? I don't know why that just popped up.
Well, to answer that question, we will find out in a future Huntress story when Helena Wayne found out that her father was Batman, but it was definitely fairly early on in her life. She was still a very young kid when he told her, oh yeah, I'm Batman. But yeah, he tells Power Girl in this story that the JSA's been inactive for 12 years. My dad told me this story, and so the JSA have been inactive for the majority of my childhood, really. So if we take into account that Helena Wayne was born in 1957 and the JSA disbanded, in 1951, that's about 5 or 6 years now that the JSA had not been active at the time she was born. So when Helena Wayne was growing up in the 1960s, there was no JSA active, although, her dad was probably active as Batman on occasion, because by this point he had retired the mantle as well. So, and Robin, eventually started, operating solo as well, but it was not until I think 1965 or 1966 when the JSA, upon finding out that the Justice League existed on Earth 1, it wasn't until they started having those JSA and JLA crossovers that they started becoming active again. And I would say Helena must have been at least 6 or 7 years old. So around the time that she found out that her father was Batman was around the time that the JSA started being active again. And that's when I think Helena starts becoming more aware of not just her origins, but she starts becoming aware of, what the superhero shtick is like, and eventually informing her future decision of becoming the Huntress. So yeah, it's 12 years is quite a long time, but I wouldn't say for the majority that she was growing up, because I think she was still a very young kid when they started being active again. And she was a teenager in the 70s, so yeah, I think that they got back together around 1965, 1966, around the time that Dick Grayson made his debut in that hybrid Robin costume. So
I have excuse me, why don't we just go ahead and dig in a little bit on the whole the point of this story, that the Justice Society closed up shop sort of abruptly here. What did you think of that?
So, and I was going to say, Laurel, isn't just Diane an excellent resource for
Oh, definitely.
JSA stuff? So I'm going to ask her for help on this. So isn't this about like Paul Levitt's or like the state of comics during that time period where they disbanded, where you got the code of, hey man, comics are rotting the children's minds?
Well, the story, okay, so if the story that Paul Levitz is telling here is coinciding with the actual discontinuation of the Justice Society and All-Star Comics in 1951 or 1952. It was around that time frame. that DC stopped publishing All-Star comics. So the year here is corresponding with the actual cancellation of All-Star back in the early 50s. So I would say that this was before the age of before the I forget what that book is called. Yeah,
Seduction of the Innocent.
There we go. Seduction of the Age of Innocence. That's a very different book. But no, yeah, the Seduction of the Innocent. That came a little later. So this was 1951, 1952 that All-Star originally was originally cancelled. But I think what Paul Levitz was trying to do here was that he was trying to explain, what happened, in between the Justice Society's last adventure, which is actually acknowledged in the story, and why they were inactive for such a long time. So he was basically doing what Jeff Johns is very famous for doing, and that is explaining things that were never previously explained. And this was one of those things, what happened with the JSA after that one, case with the key, right? So what have they been doing since then? So this is what this story seeks to answer. But the great thing about this is that it's told entirely from Helena Wayne's point of view. So she wasn't there when it happened, but she got the information from someone who was, which was, her father, Batman. And so Helena Wayne is kind of functioning as that bridge between, the previous generation and the newer generation. So we're seeing Helena basically explain things from the point of view of someone who wasn't actually there but was eventually informed on what happened. So Paul Levitz is trying to fill in a gap, but he's trying to fill in a gap in a way that's easily accessible to a new reader who was most definitely not around in 1951 when the original All-Star comics got cancelled. So if we take into account that the readers for this story were very young Gen X kids, they were definitely not around when the original All-Star got cancelled. So they kind of have to fill in that gap of, okay, this is what happened in their last adventure, and this is what happened after that, and this brings everyone up to speed to what's going on now with the Justice Society. And it's kind of ironic because All-Star Comics was very briefly relaunched, picking up exactly where it left off, in terms of serial numbers. But then it was also cancelled the same year this story was published. So All-Star Comics was once again cancelled in 1979, and this story is being told in Adventure Comics. So it's kind of a bit ironic that we're explaining. It's a bit ironic that we're explaining the cancellation of the first cancellation of All-Star Comics after the second cancellation of All-Star Comics. So it's a bit ironic at the same time.
What did you think of the actual fact that they, in the storyline, left the superhero business so abruptly and stayed away for so long?
Are you asking my opinion or Ashford? Sorry.
You. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. How do I feel about that explanation? Well, I think it makes sense within the context of what really happened, especially in 1951. If we take into account that in the real world, the Justice Society and the Golden Age heroes were kind of losing popularity amongst, readers, because they were mostly popular during World War II. But since World War II ended in 1945, people just kind of moved on, including, young kids. And so they had to find a way to make these heroes relevant again. So when you take into account that, the Golden Age heroes were mostly popular, as icons during World War II, right? And we saw that, the Golden Age heroes back then, not just at DC, but other publishers as well, frequently worked with the US government, right? It only made sense that the US government would be the reason that they would stop being active for such a long period of time, especially considering how much power the US government actually has over, civilians. And the JSA, despite, what they do in costume, they're still civilians. So to be told, okay, so in the name of transparency, because we caught you guys with this guy that you captured, a foreign agent, we need to know more about your affiliation with this person. But in the name of transparency, we need you to reveal your identities as well, right? And so I think that's significant because the thing is that in the 1940s, President Roosevelt never asked them to unmask, never asked them to reveal their identities. And they were okay with that for a while until they ran into a villain that I guess they should not have ran into. And they decided, okay, because this person is very high on the most wanted list, not just here in the US, but around the world, we need to know more about what you know. And because this guy is very dangerous, we need to know your identities as well and how you may be possibly linked to him. So I think it kind of makes sense when you consider what the Golden Age canon actually is for these characters. So yes, I would argue that if the JSA is going to be enacted for any reason whatsoever, then yes, the US government saying unmask yourselves is be the most logical way that, they would temporarily cease their activities until a major crisis hits. So
okay, and I have some questions about this. All right, so I'm 15 in 1979. I read this, so I'm like, okay. And when you read the story, it's telling you, Paul Levitz is telling you, this is how they disbanded. So that kid, they have to know, like, hey, this story wasn't actually told in real 1959 or whenever the original JSA or All-Star Comics ended. So then they have that. Like, okay, now I feel like I'm up to speed. If they write some new JSA stuff, I'm good. But then later, and on the Huntress podcast, we covered I Accused, the Justice Society versus America, or America versus Justice Society, where you get this story again, kind of. And you get the whole thing where, the Spear of Destiny and all that. So I was telling Laurel this before we started recording. I feel like we've gotten this story a number of times, how they disbanded, or this is so definitive, is referred to a lot. And I even read the current Flash issue in 2021, and it was even, they went back to World War II and the Spear of Destiny was involved.
Yeah, it's definitely
it's
definitely been referred to.
So that wasn't really the whole thing of the JSA trying to get the Spear of Destiny away from Hitler. Was that never a thing until America versus the JSA?
Well, it's certainly not referred to during the original All-Star Comics run, which is what we just read. Now, the Spear of Destiny was at least brought up in the JSA origin story. I forget what, if it was not in All-Star Comics, but it was in, I think, the story that helped relaunch All-Star Comics. The Origin of the Justice Society, I believe, is the name of that story. And it was also written by Paul Levitz. It was featured in a very different comic, which the name escapes me right now. But it is featured in the All-Star Comics Only Legends Live Forever trade. Actually, if I remember correctly, the story was actually published after the relaunch of All-Star Comics, and it was published before the introduction of Helena Wayne Huntress. So yeah, I would say that, yeah, my mistake. Yeah, it was published after the relaunch of All-Star Comics, the Origin of the Justice Society, and it was published before they introduced the Huntress. So yeah, the Spear of Destiny was mentioned in that story. It just was not mentioned in All-Star Comics. It was introduced in a separate story published in a very different magazine. So the Spear of Destiny did come up prior to America versus the Justice Society. It just didn't come up in All-Star Comics, or it wasn't referenced in All-Star Comics, but it was referenced before that story.
Didn't this, the Spear of Destiny stuff was in All-Star Squadron 2, wasn't it?
It might have been. I may have to revisit, to be honest.
Yeah, there's a podcast going on, and I can't remember now. I think that's where I read it.
Yeah, and I need to get caught up with that. So far, I think I'm like on issue 6, and it hasn't been broached yet. But yeah, the connective tissue to this is amazing.
Okay, well, we sort of touched on that. I'm going to go through this chronologically a little bit. I think maybe that'll be easier for us to do. We've got this scene at the beginning between Huntress and Power Girl. The one thing I have on the splash page of the team is going to this thing, and all we get is a couple sentences saying that they're going to go to this funeral. We don't get any information further on what they're doing to find the Spirit King that killed Mr. Terrific. It's just a sentence. What did you think of that? I was a little disappointed that we didn't have some sort of an adventure following up on that. What do you think, Ashford?
Well, okay, me personally, I was distracted because, and again, Diane was able to help me confirm it. About 5 years ago, I collected this trade where it had this scene in there, but maybe not the funeral thing. I think it went straight from when we covered one story with, it started off here where it's like, hey, I'll race you down the stairs. And as Power Girl's going super speed, Huntress jumps over the stairwell, banister, I'm sorry, I don't know what to call it. And I was like, okay, I remember that. And then immediately after that, they went to eat on that rooftop that we read about a while ago. And Diane, if you can help me about like how that was compiled into that trade.
Okay, so actually the I call it the romantic lunch scene actually happened much earlier in that trade that you did. So you're describing Justice Society Volume 2. And in Justice Society Volume 2, you know, this happened, the lunch scene happened in literally the last issue of All-Star Comics number 74. And after that it was Adventure Comics. So the serialization of that is that the first half of the book is All-Star Comics and the second half of the book is Adventure Comics. So literally after the romantic lunch scene in All-Star, we go straight into Adventure Comics, and then this story that we're talking about now is the last Adventure Comics story that the JSA appeared in. So what the trade left out was the JSA and JLA crossover. So the 465, the Adventure Comics 465, did have Mr. Terrific appear, you know, in the epilogue. And he says, oh yeah, we're going to Earth 1. You know, I'm going to go to Earth 1 with you guys. And they're summoned to a Justice League. They're summoned to the Justice League satellite, right? But then this story picks up immediately after that JSA, JLA crossover. So there's a story missing between 465 and 466, which is the JLA, JSA story that was actually collected in Crisis on Multiple Earths, Volume 5. So, yeah, it's missing that story. So, if you haven't read, in terms of traits, if you have not read Crisis on Multiple Earths, Volume 5, you're going to be totally lost as to what the heck happened to Mr. Terrific between 465 and 466. You're only told that, oh yeah, we're going to Earth 1 to visit the Justice League, and unless you read that story, by the time you see Mr. Terrific again, he's very much dead, and they're going to his funeral. So,
and just to answer Laurel's question, yeah, I was so distracted by the Power Girl Huntress talking, and then it jumped straight into that backstory. I forgot about the Terrific funeral. So
I just wish we'd had, you know, the adventure to hunt down Spirit King. You know, that would be the next thing I think this team should be doing.
And see, but you know what? I think I can't remember which podcast I listened to, but I think they kind of joked about how that goes unresolved for a long time.
No, okay.
Like real world time.
Okay.
Yeah, another thing to take into account there is that I think one possible reason they did not follow up on that story was because it was published at the time that the DC implosion happened, so they were cancelling comics left and right in 1979. While Adventure Comics, you know, stuck around for a couple more issues, they decided to end the JSA's segment in Adventure Comics. Probably because it wasn't, you know, proving to be as popular, I don't know. But at least not until the 1980s anyway. So anyway, the DC implosion happened around this time, so maybe there was a plan to follow up on that story of them capturing the Spirit King, but because they literally only had one story left, that they could actually use up, they ultimately decided to use that on, explaining, what happened, in 1951 when All-Star Comics got published. So they decided to explain, the gap between 1951 and when we saw the JSA JLA again, I think around 1965. So they decided to explain that, and then they, kind of had to brush over the Mr. Terrific stuff. So they probably just said, you know what, we'll, if we're able to, we'll probably follow up on it in a Justice League or Justice Society crossover event story. But for now, we'll just, because the JSA only got one story left at this point, let's just focus on telling, what happened between 1951 and 1952. So they, instead of following up on the aftermath of Mr. Terrific's death, they just kind of confirmed that still happened and that the funeral was on. And that was all the attention that it got. So yeah, I think the DC implosion most likely had more to do with why that story didn't get a proper follow-up than a case of they just didn't feel like it,
Mm-hmm. Well, we do have this pleasant relationship growing between the Huntress and Power Girl, which we get here. And I'm so used to seeing Power Girl in the Jeff Johns series where she's confident and brass, I guess is a good way to describe it, brash. But in this, she's much more wide-eyed, innocent, and it is Helena that's sort of explaining how the world works with the we only get together for, weddings, funerals, and christenings, that kind of thing, introducing her to the real world. And I just forget this whole she was raised by... what did they say? Computers or something like that. I was like, oh my goodness, I forgot all about that.
Yeah, well, the thing is that Power Girl, when she was introduced in All-Star Comics number 58, this was back in 1975, right? Like literally the last day of 1975. Yeah, she was introduced and she just kind of appeared out of nowhere, but they did not explain her origin story until a few years later in Showcase. In 3 issues of Showcase, we got Power Girl's origin story, and in that origin story it was established that she was Kara Zor-El, the same. So we learned that she is literally the Earth 2 counterpart of the Earth 1 Supergirl, but instead of growing up in Argo City like Supergirl did on Earth 1, she grew up on Kandor, and so she was actually born there. So actually Power Girl didn't even get to grow up on Krypton because she was rocketed off at the same time that Kal-El was, which is another major difference between her and Supergirl. Supergirl, stayed on Argo City for she was actually a teenager when Krypton originally blew up. So she got to experience life on her home planet before the big explosion. But Power Girl did not have that luxury. She was an infant. She was born at the same time that Superman was. And Kal-El was rocketed off first, but then, Zor-El, her father, managed to make a spaceship. Now, originally, Kara's mother was supposed to go with her on that spaceship, but they didn't have enough time to build a ship big enough for mother and daughter. So what they did was that they made a small one for Power Girl, or for Kara, to put her in, and they rocketed her off, but because the ship was a lot slower, it arrived 60 years later. So she kind of grew up, inside his spaceship. So she was a baby when she was first placed into the spaceship, and her body grew up in that spaceship, but she also had her mind hooked to a computer, and she grew up in a virtual reality version of Krypton. So from Power Girl's point of view, the virtual world of Krypton she experienced was for her the real world, until she finally woke up and realized, okay, lots of things are different. So Power Girl at this point in her timeline is still adjusting to suddenly grow. She's adjusting to living an actual life versus living a virtual life. So she's still doing a lot of adjusting in this time frame. And because Kryptonian culture is very different from Earth culture, well, beginning with the fact that Earth has lots of cultures, she's getting used to American culture, and so there's still a lot of things she doesn't quite understand yet, because the thing is that when Power Girl arrived in Earth 2 canon, she was already physically 18 years old, at least, which means that Helena Wayne is slightly older than her in this time frame. And so she literally arrived on Earth around 1974, 1975, as implied in the showcase story. So she's relatively new to Earth. So she's only been on Earth for a couple of years. And so she's kind of still getting used to things. So yeah, so Power Girl that is newly arrived on Earth is a very different Power Girl who has lived on Earth for a few decades, which is the version of Power Girl that we saw in the Jeff Johns run. So literally her very first friend, her very first real friend in Power Girl's timeline is Helena Wayne, the Huntress. So when Jeff Johns revisited this relationship again in JSA Thy Kingdom Come, that story arc, he elaborated on why this relationship is so important to Power Girl. Helena Wayne, the Huntress, was literally her first real friend that she made on Earth. And so to Power Girl, she's a very important person in her life. She's not just anyone, she's not just any friend that she lost. She was someone actually important to her. So, and I think that's something that Jeff Johns will bring up again in the Infinite Frontier relaunch of JSA.
Ashford, are you liking this relationship as much as I am?
Oh, yes. I think it's fun stuff. I enjoy it quite a bit.
I loved the art in this opening sequence. Especially the when she's done jumping down the stairs and she's sort of going to tell the story. And it's very noirish. That's for some reason that one. Maybe because it's black and white, it hits me that way as well. Because again, the DC app has these in black and white. I really would have liked to have seen this in color because there's so many colorful characters running around. We've got the whole JSA in it, so it would be fun to have seen it in color. But at any rate, I really like the art and Helena tricking Power Girl and jumping down the stairs instead of actually running down the stairs. Did anybody else find it sort of, I don't know, annoying that there she is landing on high heels?
That's why I read this like 5 years ago, and that's what I remember distinctly. But this stuff is just so fun, and we gone on about the art by Joe Staten. It's beautiful. It looks classic and modern at the same time, so I love that. I took a screenshot of it, of one of the pages. I love it.
Oh, I just was like, really? We're fighting crime in high heels. Ah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it looks elegant. It's definitely not the looking. It's just, man, that's got to be hard to do. Cowboy boot heels I could see, but these, I'd break an ankle doing. Okay, the thing we have, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Just wait until you start seeing her climb skyscrapers in high heels. We will get to
goodness.
We will get to that story when we get to the Joey Cavalieri era.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Well, we said it was a more innocent time, so I just have to roll with that. Well, they still do it today. It's not like they don't. It's just, I look at it and think, oh my God, she's landed in heels. The thing we haven't really touched on much was this whole plot with the mystery man and the satellite. He lets them have this satellite, and we have this whole adventure. We never do find out exactly who he was. Do you think this was a good, story to lead into the whole Un-American thing? Trial, whatever you want to call that, hearing?
Congressional hearing.
Yeah, did this part of the story work for you guys? Did you like it? Or was it like, yeah, this is great, classic JSA?
Well, what's interesting about it is, okay, so it's the whole thing of the JSA, which is this generational team. And Congress said you must unmask. they refuse to do it. And it's interesting how when I see like Watchmen stuff, I don't know if they're supposed to be Charleston characters or whatever, but I think JSA, because in Watchmen they do that generational thing. JSA does that. And then I remember reading Civil War in Marvel, where it's the whole thing of some of them went, I'll unmask, some of them went, I will not do that. But it's interesting how all of those concepts, it's right here.
Mm-hmm. What did you think about the
comics first team?
What did you think about the satellite part of the adventure?
Where like you said, they were lured there. Mm-hmm. It's interesting because, again, I think I've said this a number of times. I feel like we've seen the story a number of times, but when we read it in America versus JSA, this one dude that went to the mobsters that went like, hey, I know how to take the JSA out. He wasn't in that, right?
I don't remember him, no.
Yeah, I don't think so. So, but no, I think it's interesting. I like how the JSA, like, is street level. Like, some mobsters want to take him out. And, like, in the end, like, this dude wasn't supernatural. But, yeah, when they show up and it's those robot things, I liked it because it got wacky.
Classic JSA adventure, yeah.
There you go.
How about yourself, Diane? Did you get a kick out of it?
I mean, there's some things that I felt could have been better explained, like, how the heck did he fund, because the thing is that the crime bosses in that one scene, they gave him a handful of millions, but not necessarily enough to be able to build a satellite, in such a short time frame. So he must have gotten the resources and the funding elsewhere, and the crime bosses handing him money was just a formality or a technicality. So I do feel that, the timing of the satellite and the technology aspect of it would have been better explained. But yeah, and then there's that one panel where Senator O'Fallon says, no one but the US has this kind of technology. And I'm like, well, there's Russia, they have compatible technology to the US. How do we know that, it didn't come from there, So this could have been leaning into Cold War stuff right there. But here's another thing, alien technology was also a thing that happened in the 50s. So the thing is that the Silver Age, one of the things that characterized the Silver Age, most notably in the mid-1950s through the mid-1960s, so is that you got, alien invasions, you've got robots, you've got all kinds of weird sci-fi stuff happening. So I do think that you could have gone a little bit more bonkers. I mean, we're talking about the Silver Age period at this point. You could have taken it a bit further and said, well, I struck a deal with some aliens, the Saturnians or something, and they have the technology to make the satellite in a short time frame. You could have just said that the satellite was made by aliens, and so that would validate the US senator saying no one but the US has that kind of technology. I'm like, well, you've got space aliens, you've got the Nazi Saturnians that appeared in a Batman story, so that could be easily explained. But that's just my own nitpick there. I do wish that the whole satellite bit, especially since they had robots, which is very Silver Age, style, I've kind of wished that there would have been a better explanation for how the satellite materialized in the form of, aliens built it or something. It's a nitpick, but, I do think that for the most part the story works. I just wish that certain parts could have been explained better, and considering that this was around the time that the Silver Age started, you could have gone totally bonkers with it. You could have just said that, aliens from Saturn made the satellite. I would have been down with that, to be honest.
Yeah, well, it was kind of a crazy story, and it doesn't exactly relate well to the next part, which is, oh my god, you were seen with this guy. I was like, well, maybe they should have had some sort of a spy thriller adventure instead of science fiction adventure. Maybe that would have helped me understand how the things were related a little bit better. Maybe if it was a different kind of adventure they were on. Because the satellite story is fun. I just don't know if it fits as well here as something else might have. And yeah, Diane, it would have definitely helped if they had said, oh my goodness, you know, these aliens gave me this tech and I'm going to sell it out to the mob. And that's how I'm going to make my money or something like that. That would have worked for me. One last question. The reason that Batman was telling his daughter, the Huntress here, about this, how they came to an end, she says it was supposed to teach her something. What do you think it was supposed to teach? Do either one of you have any ideas?
Ashford, how about you go first?
Maybe about I just respect for the lineage of the JSA. I feel like Huntress, she holds them up in high esteem, and the legacy. I mean, that's the word. Like, I think I've been reading JSA, and I started off with, you know, the Jeff Johns run for a little bit over a decade, and like that's always my key word, legacy. Mm-hmm. So like, and that's interesting too, because Batman is not in these adventures. So this is an oral history from it being told to Batman telling it to Helena Wayne. So this oral tradition. And so like, yeah, that's kind of interesting that you extract that out of there. Like, what was she supposed to learn from this? That no matter what, the JSA must go on.
My personal takeaway was rather different. I think considering that, you know, the JSA came across, you know, a high-profile, world-known villain in the form of this guy that has no name, okay? We just know that he's a foreign agent, you know. I think the lesson that he was trying to teach Helena here is be careful what cases you take on, because if you take on the wrong case, you know, it could very well end your career. Now, I don't think that he was expecting Helena Wayne to become a costumed hero, because he very much discouraged her to take on, you know, that lifestyle, as we learned very early on in All-Star Comics, you know. So I don't think he told her this story with the expectation that she would become, you know, a costumed hero just like himself. But I think, you know, considering that we know at this point that Helena Wayne is a lawyer, she may have conveyed to her father at one point, you know what, I want to fight, you know, justice just like you, Daddy, you know. Because the thing is that Bruce Wayne was already working for the police by this point. He was, I think, police commissioner by this point. And so regardless of when Helena Wayne found out, you know, that her father was Batman, in addition to being police commissioner, you know, I think she knew from the beginning that, you know, her father had heroic traits. He was a strong fighter for justice. And I think she wanted to do something along those lines as well. But because Batman, Bruce Wayne, has a lot of experience, you know, with very different types of villains, including, you know, high profile villains, he says, be careful about the cases you take up, because they can very well destroy your career. So she might have been expressing, at least from a very young age, that she wanted to at least get into law enforcement or law in some capacity. And that's when he said, be aware of who you run into, because it could very well end your career. So I think that was the lesson he was trying to teach Helena by telling her about what happened to the JSA in 1951.
I like that.
Yeah, my impression was that one man was able to do this. And I think, is that supposed to be Nixon in that picture?
It's supposed to be Senator O'Fallon, I think.
Okay.
Remember
But
him?
he does kind of look like Nixon there.
It's just odd how that looks. Because, you know, it just one man was able to basically destroy them, quote unquote. I don't know if, and, you know, I don't know if it was supposed to be that you stick to your guns as far as what you will and will not do, because they've decided that, no, we're going to protect our families and our identities, and, you know, rather than give in to this demand, we're going to leave. I don't know if that would have been, you know, stick to your morals, your values, or if it was like Diana saying, beware, because, you know, someone in power can destroy you. I don't really have anything else. Do either one of you have any last words, Diane?
I guess most of my thoughts at this point is, I would say the main, as far as Helena Wayne is concerned in this story, I think, this is a great story for kind of getting some insight into what her childhood may have been like, because this entire story is narrated by Helena Wayne. She's the one giving all the details. But I also like the fact that, she's here with Power Girl. So I think that in addition to giving insight into what Helena Wayne's childhood was like, and this is going to be followed up on in future stories, future Huntress stories, I think it's very significant that it's Power Girl that they decided to, pair up with Huntress for this story, not just to serve as the audience who has no clue what the heck's going on, and so Helena gets to explain to Power Girl, and by extension the audience, what happened, between 1951 and 1965, when the JSA became active again. I think having Power Girl there is very significant for that reason, but also because they're trying to cement that these two women are best friends, and this is going to be followed up on in a later Huntress story, and of course this will be a thing in Roy Thomas's Infinity Inc. series. So yeah, I think they're setting up two things there. They're setting up, they're setting up a bit more information that's going to be followed up on regarding Helena Wayne's childhood, and they're also firmly establishing that Power Girl is going to be one of the more significant relationships moving forward. So, and we'll definitely see Power Girl again in a future Huntress story that also establishes that Helena Wayne's in a romantic relationship with a guy that Power Girl very much doesn't like, and that will be very fun to talk about.
And what's cool about all of this is with Power Girl getting this information, in her future, that information would be wisdom, because Power Girl would be a chairperson of the Justice Society of America.
You want to close us out, Ashford?
Yeah, let's do that. So let us know. Hey, we love the feedback at the very beginning to add to the discussion. So please write to us at thehuntress.podcast.com. You can also reach us on Twitter at Huntress Podcast. And if you want to email us in long form, write to us in long form, you can write to us at writeonnetwork@gmail.com. That is WRIGHT onnetwork@gmail.com. You can listen to us on Apple Podcasts, and we really love your support if you could write to us on Apple Podcasts. Give us a 5-star rating to help other people find us, because we know we have a lot of Helena Wayne enthusiasts out there, and we would love to add them to the flock. Also, we're on Spotify, so write in /Huntress Podcast. You'll find us if Spotify is your bag, man. Be on the lookout on this same feed. I interviewed writer-editor Joseph Illich, and we talked about Cassandra Cain's Batgirl and other things that should be a fun listen. And I want to thank our patrons, K-Say, Alan Wright, Delvin Sims, Tim Price, Cluck Trent, Mark Blair, Rob Kelly, and Paul Hicks. Thanks a lot, because we have some exclusive content on the Right On Network. Right now we have two new things. Mark and myself, we're doing an audio commentary over John Pertwee's Doctor Who. We're doing Ambassadors of Death. So give that a listen. So until next time, take care of each other. Bye-bye.